Romans 11:1. I ask then, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. So the question was, well, did all the Israelites get rejected? And Paul's saying, well, no, I didn't get rejected. I'm an Israelite, as well as Barnabas and Mark and the rest of the 12. So not all Israelites got rejected. Romans 11:2-4. Don't you know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah? How he appealed to God against Israel. Lord, they have killed your prophets and they have torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to him? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. What Paul's referring to was a time when the king of Israel was a Baal worshiper, and he killed all the prophets of God, to the point that Elijah thought he was the only one left. And God pointed out that no, there are 7,000 others. Paul is using this passage to talk about the Jews in his day. Paul is saying that he is part of the remain with the 12 and Barnabas and a few others, but that most of the Jews have abandoned God. I believe that most of the Jews in Israel would have been very offended by this. Remember, with Jesus, the Pharisees were very into the law. They studied the Bible. They memorized huge sections of it. They went to the synagogue every week. That's the equivalent of our going to church. They tried to obey the Bible. They prayed. And yet Paul was saying that really they were the same as the Baal worshippers. So, what's going on here? I think we get a clue in the Old Testament if we look at Isaiah 1:12-17. When you come to appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moon, Sabbath, convocations. I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Your new moon feasts and your appointed festivals, I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even you offer many prayers. I'm not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourself clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight. Stop doing wrong. Learn to do right. Seek justice. Defend the oppressed. Take up the cause of the fatherless. Plead the case of the widow. Notice that the people were doing all the things that you would consider to be religious. You know, they were going to Sunday school, they were going to church, they were praying, they were tithing, they were doing everything. And God says, get out of my sight. I don't care about the prayers, I don't care about the offerings, I don't care about any of that, unless you're seeking justice. Kind of reminds you of Matthew 22, doesn't it? There are only two commands in the whole Bible. Love God and love your neighbor. Loving your neighbor means being nice to people. And I think what we're seeing here is part of loving your neighbor is trying to make sure that they receive justice. Matthew 22, 37-40. Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commands." Throughout history, you see that man has always preferred religious over godly. What is the difference? Religious is set rules, a checklist. Everybody likes checklists. Did I do this? Did I do that? Do I do this? Godly is about the heart. These two commandments are not checklist Christianity. They're about the heart. Loving God, loving your neighbor, being nice to people is more fluid. You have to look at every situation and say, what reflects love? So you see in Isaiah, they had a checklist view of things. I pray, I tithe, I go to the temple, I do all the religious things. But do I love people? When they were seeing people being mistreated, they didn't care. When they saw people that were being treated unjustly, not my problem. When they saw people starving, not my problem. So they were religious, but they were not godly. The same was true in Jesus and Paul's time in the first century. You saw Jesus dealing with all the time. A man, he healed his hand on the Sabbath. And they were all upset. Well, that's the Sabbath. You broke that checklist. You're not supposed to do work on the Sabbath. There's a checkbox for that. But Jesus was not concerned about the checkbox. He was concerned about loving his neighbor and what was best for the man. Paul is saying that most Jews at his time period didn't love people. They were all concerned with the checklist. And he's saying that there's only a small remain that actually were following God's teaching, and that the most important things were loving God and loving your neighbor. When we talk about today, we talk about Christianity. But the problem is, Christianity reflects mankind. So when we talk about Christianity, most Christians really care about checklists. And the checklists don't really reflect these two commandments. It's a sin to have tattoos, piercings, smoking, drinking, length of your hair. All those are check boxes, but none of them really have anything to do with the two great laws. Surveys have shown most non-Christians, when they think of Christians, view them as hypocrites and judgmental. And the problem is, I think there's a lot of truth to that. When people think of Christians based upon the two commands, they should think of people who love other people. And that's not what we have going. Christians should be the ones that are out there trying to get justice for everybody. Trying to help people, not just in the church, but in our society. Christians should be the ones that are trying to make sure the laws are fair, that everybody is treated equally. And far too often we don't care. So the question is, who is part of the Remain today? Who would Paul would say is part of God's Remain? It may seem like I'm being negative on the modern church. I'm really not. I'm just saying what we have today in both the main Protestant denominations and the Catholic Church is kind of what you would expect. We can see through history that man likes checklists, to keep it simple. And they don't like the two great commandments. To love God and love your neighbor. That doesn't come naturally to people. But checklists do, So I'm thinking that what we see today in both the Catholic Church and the main Protestant denominations are just what you could have predicted 2,000 years ago. And that today, we also have a Remain. And I think it's important to the people listening to this to make sure that you become part of that Remain and that you are a part of that Remain.